Welcome to all of you who attend this short-term live stream event on a very, I would say, revolutionary case. This half hour, maybe a little bit of a half hour, we're going to discuss the case that two well-known, very experienced and engaged Dutch immigration lawyers have submitted for the Court of Justice against Frontex on their behavior in a return procedure. I would like to introduce to you, therefore, the two immigration lawyers, Schüller and Lisa Marie Komp, very conveniently together in one screen. Welcome to this event. Great that you found time, because today is a very busy day for you, because this complaint has just been released, the information about it, and you have got already a lot of media attention. So I'm very happy that you're able now to discuss a little bit with us what the case is about and what the impact is, and what exactly the procedure entails. So maybe can I just ask you to start with, what is the case about? What had happened?
Shall I just briefly start with the history of the case?
Yeah, please do.
I was approached by these Syrians, a family, father, mother, and 4 children, who arrived on a Greek island, were then subsequently sent to a few different Greek islands, formally registered for asylum, the pre-asylum registration, and were then told that they were going to be transferred to Athens because they were vulnerable. However, rather than being transferred to Athens, they were then put onto a plane, a Frontex funded and organized plane. They were not told that they were going to be sent to Turkey. And during the flight, each individual person was separated from another by border guards. So you had father, mother, and then the children sitting apart. Now, as these children were very, very young, they started to cry and got very upset. And they were not allowed to talk. And then they were sent back to Turkey, where they started their flight from. Spent 2.5 weeks in alien detention, and were then released and told that they were staying illegally in Turkey and that they might face deportation back to Syria. So in their desperation, they fled to the north of Iraq rather than stay in Turkey. I was fortunate enough, through the help of lawyers and NGOs, to get all of the documentation in. So I lodged an application at the European Court against Greece for a pushback. And in addition to that, I lodged an application, an internal complaints procedure against Frontex, and that resulted in a decision after 3.5 years, in which Frontex basically shied away from taking any responsibility. They basically concluded that it was a Greek situation and that they had no role, despite the fact that the documentation was quite clear that they disregarded their monitoring obligations. And that decision in turn led to the thought that we might want to start an action for damages. And as Lisa is the experienced lawyer in that, I would gladly give the floor to her to explain a bit more about that procedure.
Thank you.
Maybe just to be clear, so the complaint is also, you say on the one hand, they returned the person already before there was access to a real asylum procedure. So this
Correct.
is one. And the other thing is the behavior, the treatment of the people during the return flight, right?
Yeah, and in addition to that, the absence of a return decision, which under the returns directive is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
So against the conduct of Greece, we're at the European Court in Strasbourg. And with regard to the role of Frontex in this tragic event, we're in Luxembourg. And this is what Tineke.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, Marie, please do come in.
Yes, well, I'm happy to give a bit more information about the complaint we now lodged at the EU Court of Justice. So, as Flip just explained, the position of Frontex was that it recognized that indeed human rights violations had taken place because there hadn't been a return decision, the family hadn't been allowed to an asylum procedure before being returned. And Frontex also acknowledges that the treatment of the children during the flight was unacceptable. However, Frontex takes the position that only Greece is to blame. Now, the question we put before the European Court now is whether Frontex itself bears liability for human rights violations in joint operations. And to explain the basis upon which we base the claim a bit further, Frontex's mandate, back then it was still the 2016 regulation, there's now in 2019 a new regulation was launched, but in important, they overlap in important aspects. Both of them contain obligations of Frontex, firstly in general, to ensure that all operations of Frontex respect human rights, and then more specifically, they contain obligations requiring Frontex to basically do due diligence before an operation is launched, to monitor an operation while it is being executed, and to evaluate an operation once it has been completed, all with a view to make sure that these operations actually comply with human rights. Now, the case is that in this 3.5 years internal complaints procedure, we repeatedly requested Frontex to provide us with the documentation that shows that they actually complied with these due diligence obligations, because they are obliged to draft reports about that. None of these reports were provided by Frontex, so they couldn't show any proof of any measure taken to actually ensure that human rights were respected. And now, what is quite well noticeable is that this is especially grave, since the European Ombudsman had issued, just a year before, had issued a report on return operations, in which it included very specific recommendations to Frontex regarding measures it should take to ensure that return operations comply with human rights. Now, the very simplest measure being to check whether the people sitting on the flight actually have a return decision. And like I said, not even that measure has been taken. So Frontex blindly flew these people from Greece to Turkey and then takes the position, well, it's all to blame on Greece.
Yeah, well, at the same time, we talk about October 2016, and this was also a pretty chaotic situation in Greece. Many people waiting to get access to an asylum procedure. I cannot imagine that Frontex was not aware of that as well. So this is, of course, in an individual case, this liability procedure. Can you say something about the impact or the relevance of this claim for more the overall policies of Frontex and the safeguards? What do you expect, or what do you hope, or what do you expect of it?
Well, what we expect and what we hope is to put at issue the fundamental question whether it is acceptable to have an agency that is equipped with such a wide-ranging mandate. It has a huge budget, so it has huge possibilities to affect people's lives in a very impactful manner. And adding to that, the very purpose of Frontex is to operate in a field in which human rights violations, or the risk of human rights violations, is very high, because these people are very vulnerable. It's often chaotic situations in which Frontex has to support member states. So the risk to human rights violations is very high. And at the same time, the possibility to hold Frontex to account, the possibilities are very limited. And so far, the question hasn't been put to the court. But the fundamental question is that either the court confirms that, yes, indeed, Frontex can be held to account, but imagine the court decides that Frontex cannot be held to account and it is only the member states who are liable for fundamental rights violations in these kinds of situations. I think that would uncover a very fundamental and systemic problem that the EU has with this agency. Because like I said, it's a very powerful agency and power should be equipped with accountability.
May I just add that, as far as I understand the case law of the CJEU, the EU being
The Court of Justice.
Court of Justice, places a lot of reliance on legal consistency. And it has held on several occasions and also in different fields, the adherence to basic human rights is fundamental to this legal order. Now, you can't have a rule of law on paper and not abide by it in practice. Therefore, we are quite confident that the court will at least pick up these points and will rule basically also on the fact that by exception we now have the documentation which is lacking in many other cases, and I think that makes this a good case selection because we can prove what has happened. The fact that they were pushed back by plane, ironically, makes it a very important case, because how often can you document and attribute a pushback if it's done by land or by sea?
Exactly.
And thus, I would find it very hard to foresee that the court would not would say that Frontex is above the adherence to fundamental rights, because that would make it a free-for-all, and I find that very difficult to conceive conceptually.
Yeah, I completely concur with you that this is the core question, actually. To what extent does Frontex also has a responsibility of its own, because Frontex tends to always refer to the member state it is assisting. But indeed, I think, and even with the new regulation of 2019, it has been established even in a stronger way that Frontex itself is also responsible and obliged to respect human rights. But I agree with you, it's very important that this is then for once and all being established. And if the court would not do so, then at least we should adjust the legislation, of course, because otherwise we really get into a kind of gap, a legal limbo, in which the fundamental rights are really at stake. Suppose that the Court of Justice, because this is really what I expect, will say also with reference even to the regulation of 2016, indeed there was a responsibility of Frontex on its own. What do you expect or also hope that then the criteria would be that the Court of Justice would make clear on what exactly Frontex should do in the meantime or while before starting to assist in a return procedure? Could you think, you already mentioned something, that it should be checked at least if there would be a return decision, but should Frontex also check the substance of an asylum procedure, for instance, or should it only look at the procedural steps if they have been made? Can you say something about what you plea for, actually?
Well, I'm a practitioner in asylum law and migration law for many years. So I would be quite hesitant for Frontex to second guess the assessment of asylum motives, because a national judge will have properly adjudicated this. So unless there are major faults, I would assume that at the very least Frontex has to do a threefold check. One, has there been an asylum request and has it been rejected? And if not, then it does warrant the question to the member state, this person does want to ask for asylum. Remember that also in the ECHR case law, it was always clear that people should have a realistic chance to ask for asylum. So that's one. If it's passed this check, then the second check should be, is there a returns decision? And can that be executed? Because between maybe the decision of a national judge in an asylum procedure and the actual return, situations might have changed. The situation is volatile and so forth. But even if it passed that check, then the third question should be, can we return these people in conformity with human rights standards? Somebody might have fallen ill, something might have happened, and can we return? Can we allow the member states to return these people, or can we facilitate this return in conformity with the Charter and the Common European Asylum System? I think these three tests, which are feasible given the funds and the facilities that Frontex have, could be made operational if there is a political will. And that's more your part, Tineke Strik, but assuming that there is a will to adhere to human rights, I think that would be a practical approach. But
Well, I think what might be worth adding to that, and you pointed it out yourself, Tineke, that back then in 2016, the situation in Greece was very chaotic, and there were many reports. There had been judgments by the ECHR and by the Court of Justice that the asylum system wasn't functioning in Greece. So I think, aside this very individual check of the individuals who are being transported during the operation itself, Frontex should also, before starting an operation or starting support in a member state, analyze the general situation in that member state and analyze the vulnerabilities and the risk for human rights violations and develop a strategy how to deal with those risks and how to mitigate these risks. And like I said, I believe Frontex was already in 2016 obliged to do so, not only under its mandate, but it is a general rule in human rights law that if fundamental rights violations are foreseeable, like they were in that situation, then you have to take measures to prevent that they actually take place. So I think in addition to this very individual check, this more general analysis should also be undertaken and documented duly.
So exactly, and also, of course, in 2016, it was the case that Frontex should apply the regulation in accordance with the Charter, which also has clear obligations. Maybe then indeed you link it to the general situation, and there also my role comes in play a little bit more, because I think in a country where there is certainty that there is a good asylum procedure in place, you could maybe just limit yourself to checking the steps in the procedure. But if it comes to a country where there are a lot of doubts, if the procedure on its own, as such, the asylum procedure has a lot of deficiencies, that may not be enough. I mean, we had the case of Hungary, where finally, after 6 years of criticizing Frontex, working together with Hungary, it suspended its operation after a very clear judgment of the Court of Justice in December. But we were taken by surprise when we discovered that Frontex had continued its cooperation on returns. Now then, it's pretty clear that there are a lot of doubts as to which these return operations are in compliance with the asylum acquis and the fundamental rights. If there has been no accurate asylum procedure, before. So then you have this general situation where Frontex should say, okay, now not only individual checklist is sufficient, but we should not in any way assist, like also assisting the border management or border guarding. So this is indeed something where the general and the individual situations, well, you know, they are linked to each other. I just would like to check if people have specific questions. Yes, someone is asking, could this pave the way for further successful actions and redress? This is a very specific, it's about civil liability. We already had another case by Frontex on Article 46, like the failure to act actions, actually mainly demanding that Frontex should withdraw from Greece because of the horrible general situation regarding pushbacks. What is your answer to this? Do you see other avenues as well?
Well, my answer to that would be twofold. That on the one hand, I do believe that if the court rules that Frontex indeed bears responsibility, this will have an effect, and hopefully Frontex will draw the conclusion that it has to change the way it operates. Do I expect that there will be many, many more cases following? I'm hesitant. And the reason is not that I believe these cases aren't feasible. The reason is that access to justice is often extremely hard out of very, very practical problems. Now, if, for example, we look at the pushbacks at sea, these people are returned. It's never registered that they have actually entered Greece or whatever European country. Their mobile phones are taken away, and with that, the proof they have that they have been there. And once they're returned back to Turkey or wherever, they are in a very vulnerable situation where their first worry isn't to contact a lawyer, let alone which lawyer, and let alone which language you communicate with, but to survive and to make sure they stay safe. So I think we need to be realistic that we cannot kind of draw conclusions about how well fundamental rights are respected only on the basis of the number of cases that are being brought, because those will always be much lower than the number of fundamental rights violations taking place, but for reasons which are purely practical and not principled.
Yeah.
Just add to that we've taken several cases on Greek pushbacks to the court in Strasbourg, where these people, my clients, have documented arriving on Greek islands, and we've got photo material of them standing next to a church and so forth. One of them has recently been communicated by the European Court. So on a different legal forum, there will be developments coming through. But as Lisa has said, if you are in such a vulnerable position, the chances that through litigation you will get a lot further are quite slim, which does bear the question, Tineke Strik, you being member of the European Parliament, what can the European Parliament do vis-a-vis both Frontex and the Commission? Because it shouldn't be dependable on this sort of the luck that we have, that those clients found are us and so forth. You know, the system shouldn't be vulnerable. So
I completely agree with you. And one of the questions in the chat is also, you know, these procedures, they are important, but they take a long time. And also, indeed, they do not cover everything. So access to justice is important. I hope that the complaint procedure will change now because of the report of the EU Ombudsman. But the pushbacks are the biggest problem, of course, combined with Frontex legitimizing them or assisting them. And here, I think, indeed, the politics come in place. What we do all the time is creating more pressure on the European Commission to fulfill its role as a guardian of the treaty, because it's simple as that. The rules are clear, the obligations are clear, also for Frontex. Yesterday we had a big debate about the rule of law in Poland, this is a rule of law issue, of course, and it's about a core right to asylum. You must at least have a chance to bring your case before immigration authorities and the court. But the Commission is very silent, very hesitant. It says, it says we're not an investigative body, so we don't know what the facts actually are. But well, my comment is always look at the number of reports we already have from authoritative organizations, very consistently proving that these pushbacks are taking place. And I think also if you look at case law on the European Court of Human Rights, for instance, at a certain moment, the burden of proof shifts to the authorities and not sticks. And I think the Commission should use that. Furthermore, it says it's...
Sorry, but do you believe that the Commission should intervene in our case?
Yes, I think that would be a very important signal, because then they show that they, at least if they intervene in the right way, and because then they would really definitely unambiguously show that Frontex needs to respect the fundamental rights and has a responsibility of its own to check if a return is responsible. Indeed, that's very important. Regarding pushbacks itself, the Commission also always says it's up to the national authorities to investigate complaints, but at the moment you have a lot of evidence on systematic pushbacks. It's a part of a policies. You cannot rely on the same authorities, of course, to correct this and to get rid of that. So I really think we should try to push the Commission for more. It's very difficult to go to the Court of Justice with that, because usually the court says the Commission has a discretion to decide which instrument to use. So we are now also pushing for using the funding. The Commission is funding a big part of the border management. At least use this instrument to enforce human rights compliance. But it's a big battle, and I think we should also look at the member states, and not only the member states at the border, but also other member states who are keep on shying away, looking away, also because they don't want to get into the discussion on a common responsibility for the asylum seekers. Which should then be the consequence, of course. If you do not push back people, you have to host and assess asylum claims of many people. And therefore, I really think it should go hand in hand, more compliance with human rights, and at the same time, make sure there's a common responsibility for the asylum request. But unfortunately, we see the other way around. We see member states calling for legalizing fences, legalizing pushbacks. So my hope is very much on the litigation, and that's not good, of course. It should go hand in hand, policies and litigation.
But not just litigation, because I think one of the strengths of our case is it's part of a public campaign called Not on Our Border Watch, and what we are putting forward is respect for the rule of law, and that is not a left-wing or a right-wing issue as far as we are concerned. It has to do with the concerns that if you see that the EU has common values, one of the values is that we respect human rights. It's as simple as that. And what we are hoping for with people who ask us, it is such a big issue, what can we do? We're not saying let everybody in. The only thing we're saying is everybody deserves a fair chance to ask for protection. And if it is rejected, then you can expediently expel people in a proper manner, obviously, but it is doable. Now, what we are hoping for is that the general public who are concerned about these issues and who are horrified by the scenes at sea, write to the European Commissioner Johansson to express their concerns that it's not done in their name, not on their watch. because quite often the EU is being kidnapped by forces who are not generally trying to uphold what we have established after the Second World War, if you want to put it historically. Yes. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a question of politics. It is a question of concerned citizens making sure that their politicians send a clear message to their national parliaments and through national parliaments to Brussels to make sure that this practice has to stop immediately.
Yeah. Exactly, and therefore because politicians, a lot of politicians, not all, tend to refer to the lack of support for hosting asylum seekers. But actually, indeed, I'm because you are also campaigning, organizing a kind of campaign. You created a website, and I think that's also good that we try to raise this awareness among societies and that people can raise their voice, because sometimes people feel powerless because it's such a huge issue, and what they cannot influence. I think it's very important that they find a way to express their view, and hopefully then we can also show that there is a lot of support for another type of policy, and specifically for respecting the rule of law and the rules that we have agreed upon.
That's why our position is quite modest, which is respect the rules that you signed up for. It's as simple as that. And if you don't, you should not be surprised if you're held accountable in front of a court or through a civil lawsuit if you don't. I mean, can't make it more simpler than that.
Yeah, exactly. I have a few questions that I still saw, but maybe you can also check this out. People ask for references of the case law of your case, but also the case of the European Court of Human Rights. That may be also on your website, I guess. Also in the chat, the Greens were so. They already have the link to your website, so that's great. And there was also a question still on, the cases. I think we have now 2 cases for the Court of Justice, which we just explained. I think they're very complementary, and there may be other types that will come about. Regarding the Parliament, I would like to add, we have had this Frontex report released mid-July with a lot of conclusions and recommendations, actually, to make sure that Frontex becomes more human rights sensitive, but also compliant. And this will get a follow-up in European Parliament's plenary resolution. And we decided to include the Olaf report there, because we are still waiting for the Olaf report, and then we can really include all the recommendations and conclusions made by important institutions. So I hope the beginning of next year. There's another question about what does it mean for the border in Poland and Lithuania, where exactly I myself will go there on Monday and Tuesday. I'm pretty disappointed that I saw after our report also that Frontex went there and praised the Polish border guards for their great work, while at the same time we know that in the meantime 7 people have died at the border. We asked Frontex what type of investigation did you do beforehand to check if you could go there, what's the fundamental rights situation there. They said, unfortunately we were not able to do so. So, well, there's still a lot of improvement to be made, I must say, but it's great that we join forces. The lawyers, the NGOs, all the people I see now in the chat. I really think this is the way forward. Exchange information, team up, take all our different roles, and all together, I really hope that we will get some movement in this debate, and to start with, indeed, obey by the rules that we have made ourselves. I mean, indeed, I agree with you. This is modest. It should be feasible. And that would be, unfortunately, in asylum law, a huge step forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for this interview. Let's keep on meeting each other, cooperating each other. And this is also my plea towards the audience that just that watch this this interview. Thanks a lot and keep up the good work.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.